So like I said, this is for Allegheny 220, 230 nursing dosage calc review. And I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about flow rates that are a little bit more specific to what's happening with like heparin. And then we'll roll right into the heparin protocol, help you to kind of understand what's going on there and how to navigate that question. And then, so let me pull up. I forgot to open up a new thing, so let me just do that real quick. All right, so I did have somebody email me. Oh, okay, I see that they're here. About the rounding rules and then doing question 25. So we're going to get into those. I'm going to go over the rounding rules as we kind of solve some of these things, but the rounding is the same as what you've been doing. I know it gets a little bit dicey, especially when you have questions like, um, do I convert pounds to kilograms? Do I convert that to the 10th place then, or do I wait to the end of the problem? And I'm going to show you where probably really doesn't matter, especially when you do your final rounding. Um, excuse me. But typically, when you're going from pounds to kilograms, you're going to round your answer to the nearest tenth and then continue with whatever calculation you're working on. At least that's been the trend at Allegheny campus. As always, if there's any questions about rounding rules and things like that, just confirm it with your instructor just to make sure that everyone's on the same page. But typically, if it's a volume greater than one, round to the nearest tenth. If it's a volume less than one, it's like 0 point something, you can round to the nearest hundredth. So like the example being like if you have an answer of 1.25 milliliters, you would say 1.3 milliliters. If you have an answer that's 0.556 milliliters, then you would say 0.56 milliliters, rounding to the nearest hundredth place for in that particular example. But like I say, you really don't run into those too much. And the other thing is those of you who have, well, when you do your pediatric section, you're going to have a pediatric dosage calc test. It's not like this where like you have to pass it and take a retake. I think it's just part of your class. But there's a little bit more nuance to rounding rules when you're dealing with peds because every milligram, maybe even microgram counts because obviously you're dealing with pediatrics and a higher metabolic rate, and so there's a little bit of more nuance. You'll see that when you get to those questions later on. And if later on you have questions about that, feel free to reach out to me, and I'll do my best to help you out. Okay, so the before I go to the heparin protocol, I just want to kind of do a couple workup questions, and I apologize. Some of these are already worked through, so I'm gonna delete some of my answers here. Um, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start off with some of these flow rate questions. They seem like standard, run-of-the-mill flow rate questions that you've already worked through, but these will actually help you out when we get to the heparin protocol. You may have already gone through these and you might be good to go. But the thing that's different this time around with these flow rate questions is they're basically just asking you to convert one flow rate to another flow rate. So they're asking you to convert units per hour to milliliters per hour. Okay. Which seems like, why are we doing this? But that's what they want you to do. And it's also part of your heparin protocol. So when we're doing a rate conversion, the way that kind of illustrate this is it's kind of like when you go from miles per hour to kilometers per hour. You're traveling basically the same rate, the same speed. It's just that we're representing it either in kilometers per hour or miles per hour. Okay. So it's the same sort of thing. So when we are looking at this, we're going to see things like we have an order. It tells us we have 0.45% normal, 0.45% normal saline, 500 milliliters IV with 20,000 units, and it's infusing at 8,000 units per hour. And then we want to convert it to milliliters per hour. So the main question is, how do I go from units per hour? So I'm just going to write that out. How do I go from units per hour to milliliters per hour? So that's what we're asking here. How do I do that? So we're going to do it by doing what some of you hopefully are starting to like, or most likely most of you are like, not this again, dimensional analysis. Okay. Now there's different ways to do this, but the way I'm going to show you, I think, is the most concise way and the most specific way of getting from point A to point B, with taking out a lot of the guesswork. So, what I recommend doing is starting with whatever flow rate they give you and starting with that. So I'm going to write out 8,000 units per hour. Now, what I want to know is, can I convert units per hour to milliliters per hour? I can if I have a way to relate units to milliliters, and I do. My IV, remember that 500 milliliters and 20,000 units? Well, they're together in the same IV. Okay. That is basically the same thing as saying, you know, 5 milligrams per milliliter. But in this instance, it's 20,000 units per 500 ml. So it's just a bigger available, if you want to call it that. Okay. Now I chop this up too, and I write this in dimensional analysis as a reminder that you're already in hours. So it helps to keep in mind where we want to keep things because we don't want hours leaving the bottom of our thing, our per hour. We don't want that to become an hour at the top. We don't want to mess with that. It also helps because now I know that I can get rid of units in exchange for milliliters. And because I just told you, if you didn't know already, now you know where these numbers are coming from that I'm about to put in here. 20,000 units goes with the units. 500 milliliters goes with the milliliters. Before I do any calculation, you will see that I'm in already what I want to be in, which is milliliters per hour. So I'm going to take my calculator out. And then for some reason I turned it off. 8,000 times 500 divided by 20,000. And I'm going to get a nice even, thankfully, 200 milliliters per hour. Now, you might be thinking, well, that just seemed like a big waste of my time. But this is the second part of your calculation that you're responsible for with your heparin protocol. So you need to know how to set these up and how to get to these answers here. So using what I just showed you and assuming you didn't already do this, what would you get as your ml per hour for this secondary question that I put here? The 25,000 units, 250 ml, infusing at 25,000 units per hour. What do you get? So get an answer, type it into the chat, and then you're also feel free to direct message, I don't know, and then I'll work through it. But I'm gonna give you just a minute or two just to kind of look over and see if you can get the same answer I get. Okay, perfect. Yep. Yeah, so it looks like everyone that answered, you're on the right track. You're answering, you got the same thing I got. Those of you that are either wanting to stay silent or like lost, that's why I gave you the out, like direct message. I don't know. Um that just so it's recorded. I'm going to take my 2,500 units per hour. I'm going to multiply by my, or I'm going to get rid of units in exchange for milliliters, 25,000 units, 250 ml, and then I'm going to get the 25 ml per hour. Okay. All right. So, the reason I bring this up and try and harp on this, at least initially, is because several years ago when I first took over kind of doing these dosage calc reviews and trying to get students on board with this, the thing that everyone was goofing up was they were just putting numbers wherever. And so that's why I write out the way I write out, just to make sure that there's some sort of organization. If you do it differently and you're getting the same answer, keep doing what you're doing. I'm not here to tell you to do something different. For the insulin questions, you do exactly the same thing. Um, it tells you you have 250 ml. The thing that gets a little bit tricky is you'll see this U100, but it's 10 units. And it's infusing at 2 units per hour. And so you're going to do the exact same thing. Oh, good question, Elizabeth. Yeah. So you never use a trailing zero, right? So like the reason you don't use a trailing zero is because let's say I did write like 25.0, that could easily, and mind you, everyone's like kind of typing these days, so it's probably not as much of a problem, or it's less of a problem. There's always errors that occur. This could be misinterpreted as 250, and you can see that could be a problem, that if you're supposed to be giving them 25 mil per hour and you give them 250 mil per hour, that's why you never want to include that trailing zero. Yeah. You don't need the zero in front. You don't need the zero in back. You only really need the zero if it's part of, like, if it were 20, right? Then you would include the zero. Good question. All right, let's get to the heparin question, and then I'll come back for some of these other ones here. All right, so let me just clear this up a little bit. I delete these things just because we're going to go over them anyways, so might as well just have it fresh. That way you can kind of watch my work. And I apologize, I meant to have this cleared before, but all right. So when you get to this question, you're not going to have all these questions that I have listed here. So you probably noticed that like there's just it's just it's a lot. Sorry, I didn't. My mouse tends to over scroll. There's a lot here. Okay. You're not going to have it represented as I have it listed here. But I did this intentionally just to kind of show you that what I have listed here, where it says standard weight-based heparin protocol, that's just like kind of like a paper or the instructions that would be posted on the wall telling you this is what we're going to do based off of the patient's weight. So, saying that, you do not need to calculate or tell the CBC, the GAIAX stool. You don't need to worry about how often to do neuro checks. That's just how it shows up as like the blank weight-based heparin protocol. The only thing you really need to worry about is what I have highlighted in yellow. Okay. What's highlighted in yellow just reminds you that if the patient's weight is given to you in pounds, you need to convert it to kilograms. It tells you what the available the available medications are. So you have heparin 25,000 units in 250 milliliter half normal saline. You also have a bolus dose strength of again of heparin at 1,000 units per milliliter. So it gives you two strengths to work off of, two available concentrations to work off of. Then it tells you what to do. It tells you to bolus the patient with 80 units per kilogram, and then it tells you to start a drip at 18 units per kilogram per hour. Now, the other thing it says is answer the questions below the protocol. So the mistake I made when I introduced this question is that I didn't like create like a box around the standard weight best heparin protocol, and then that way you just focus on answering the questions. Now, for the heparin protocol question, you will be asked to answer two questions. The first question is to calculate a bolus dose in milliliters, and the second question is to calculate a flow rate in milliliters per hour. So you will get asked two questions, okay? Let's say you miss one or both questions. If you miss one, you miss one. If you miss both, you missed one. So you have to get them both right to get the question right. But if you miss them both, you don't miss two questions. This is only one question, even though there's two parts to it, part A and part B. I added for practice this part C, which I don't know that you're going to get asked about that. Okay. That's really up to your instructors. I doubt it. I don't know that I've ever seen it. I've never even seen people complaining about seeing that, but I'm going to show you just so you know how to read and interpret the heparin protocol because it's new to you. I know it's new to you, and I know that it's a challenge, and so that's why I'm going to help you out with it. Um, when you pull this up later on, if you haven't done so already, this is what the heparin bolus dose questions look like for Boyce students. You can see that everything's very consolidated. It's the same questions. It has the same information. It's just that it doesn't also include the whole protocol, which if you the first time you looked at it, you were probably like, what in the heck am I looking at here? And what am I supposed to do with this information? So if you were like, yeah, that was me, you're not alone. That's what most people do. All right. So the first question we're asking is we need to calculate the ml for the bolus. But before I get to that, I need to know what the order is. So the order is we're going to bolus the patient with 80 units per kilogram body weight. So step one before I do anything is I need to look at the patient's weight and convert it to kilograms. Now, I recommend A, asking your instructor what they want you to do with this, but it really shouldn't matter. But you should be able to just take your 156, divide by 2.2. You are going to get 70.9090, just keeps repeating. And I would recommend rounding that to 70.9 kilograms. If you wait and do your rounding after everything, it should work out to be the same number regardless. So that's something that you, like I said, you can confirm. But since they give you the weight and they want you to do multiple calculations with this, my recommendation is to simplify things, round that to the nearest tenth, and that'll save you some headaches. Most likely, when you get this test, it'll be something like 176 pounds, which is the same thing as 80 kilograms. So it'll be a whole number, and you won't have to worry about the rounding aspect. They just want you to be aware of it and know what to do. And you're going to round again in this question anyways, and I'll show you what that looks like here in just a little bit. Okay, so I think most students are fine with where we're getting the 70.9 kilograms. The next thing is we're going to convert that to units by taking the 70.9 and multiplying it by the 80 units per kilogram body weight. Um, that's a good question. So, someone asked if you got a well, first of all, you're probably not going to get that as an answer, just because the math wouldn't work out where you would get a 90.959595. But if you did, yeah, I would just round to 91. Yeah, if you ever get a question that's like 79.99999, the answer is 80. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take, you're welcome. Good question, by the way. I'm going to take the patient's weight. So let's just say 79.9 or 70.9 kilograms. So like the other question is, could I just base this off of 71? Yeah, probably. You're going to be within the same range and it should be fine. But we're going to try and be as precise as we can. And so that's I've been taught to teach you round to the nearest tenth. So that's why I'm just trying to follow that kind of rounding rule, especially when it comes to pounds to kilograms. And I'm multiplying by the 80 units per kilogram body weight. Most students don't have a problem with this. They're usually pretty good getting to this point. And you've done this before. You did this last semester. You know how to do weight-based calculations. So 70.9 times 80, and I'm going to get 5,672 units. Now, if I was looking for units, I'd be done. But unfortunately, they ask us to calculate how many milliliters to administer for the bolus. So I need a way to convert units to milliliters. So what I'm going to do is I need to find out what my available is. So I go to the protocol. So step one of the protocol just said to convert the patient's weight in kilograms. Second step in the protocol tells me my available. So I have a heparin 25,000 units and 250 milliliter half normal saline. So that's my IV. But it also tells me, and this is really important, bolus dose strength of 1,000 units per milliliter. That's what you want to use when you're calculating the bolus. I know that seems like, well, yeah, no duh. But I have had enough students over the years that they don't know which one to choose. That's why I try and get you to connect the dots that if we're calculating the bolus dose, then you use the bolus dose strength. So it's 1,000 units per milliliter. So I'm going to put my 1,000 with my units and 1 milliliter. Cancel out. We're left with milliliters. And I'm going to get 5.672 milliliters. I should probably round that number. What should I round that number to? Good. You got it. Yep. Round to the nearest tenth. Remember, if I have a volume greater than 1, round to the nearest tenth. You don't want to necessarily round it to the nearest whole number because you do. You've seen the syringes, you've seen the different ways to administer meds. You know that you can give somebody a fraction of a milliliter. Like you have that ability. That's not a problem. So round to the nearest tenth. In reality, let's say you're working with a patient and you're following a heparin protocol. The protocol might be if it's 5.7, you give them 6, or you give them 10, or you give them 5. What happens in the real world might be a little bit different than what's happening in the math class associated with this. If you if you didn't round that 70.909090, if you decided not to round it at the end, you would still end up with 5.7 as your answer. So you're welcome to try that out and just to verify that, but I'm just letting you know because I have worked it out a couple times. I'm just not going to do it again. I think you're fine rounding your weight to the nearest tenth when it comes to this because we're talking about adults. When you do pediatrics, that's where the numbers get a little bit smaller, and that's where it there could be problems with that depending on the different meds. And when you're calculating safe dose ranges. And like I said, you're going to get into that. I think that's 230 for you guys. I think that's what that is. Okay, so we calculated the bolus dose. So that's your answer. Um, I usually say it's probably a good idea to circle your answer just so that there's no question what the answer is. Just, I don't know that you need to, but sometimes it's helpful. I always say, like, if you can help the person grading your test to find your answers easiest, they're probably going to be more like, lenient if there's like any kind of mild uh, discrepancies in what your answer should be. It puts them in a better mood. Be like, okay, all right, I think that's a seven, not a one. Just make sure you write clearly. All right. The next thing it says is to calculate an infusion rate for milliliters per hour. So you might be making the connection that, okay, I know what my available is. My available is this 25,000 units, 250 ml, and you are correct because that's your IV, right? So that's what they're hooked up to. And if they're hooked up to an IV, it has to be infusing, otherwise, it's not doing anything. The next thing is to look at the protocol or our order. So the first part of our order was bolus the patient with 80 units per kilogram. And then it says to start a drip at 18 units per kilogram per hour. Okay. So that's where those numbers are coming from. The other thing is step 10 of the protocol restates what it says above the protocol. So it's said a couple different places. All right. So 70.9 is the patient's weight. We're calculating the infusion rate. So we're going to do the 18 units per kilogram hour. So we're going to get rid of kilograms. We're going to take the 70.9 times 18. And I'm going to get 1,276.2 units per hour. Just like the bolus dose, I don't want units. I want milliliters. So I want to get rid of units in exchange for milliliters. And what I pointed out to before was that the 25,000 units, 250 ml, half normal saline, that's the available we want to use because that's what's being infused. The bolus is like just a separate vial with, and you're injecting probably into as a secondary or into the port going into the patient. It's still getting in the same way. It's just that we're giving them a lot at once, and then we're going to titrate the rest over a period of time. So I think I said 250 ml, 25,000 units. And we're going to get 12.762 ml per hour. Again, I would round that, and I'm going to round that to 12.8 ml per hour. So when you do this question, you're going to um, answer, like I said, those two questions. You're going to calculate the bolus and you're going to calculate the infusion rate. Okay. Um, the trick to these is that you just need to know which available you're using. So for the bolus dose strength, you want to use the bolus dose information. For the infusion rate, you just want to use what's in the IV. What do you have available? Don't get hung up on where it says IV drip. I was just talking about this to the other class where I was telling them, oops, I was wondering what was going on here. I was telling them that sometimes you'll see this listed as drip, and then you'll instinctively want to convert that to drops per minute, but that's not what they're asking you to do here. They're just telling you that, like, if you think about it, 12.8 milliliters per hour that's dropping pretty slow. That's 2 teaspoons in an hour. That's that's coming down real slow. Okay. So we don't, that's why it's called a drip rate. Okay. It's not flowing in. It's not like you're giving them just a saline solution. They're getting that medication at a very slow rate because if you give it to them too fast, then that's a problem. And if you give it to them even slower, that might be a problem. So, anyways, that's what you're going to be calculating on your test. You're going to calculate a bolus dose, round to the nearest tenth, calculate infusion rate, round to the nearest tenth. I know that the 12.8 milliliters per hour looks weird, and I agree with that. And in reality, you might set your infusion pump to 12 or 13 or 10 or 15. But in the, math bubble that we're in for this particular question, what we want to do is just round to the nearest tenth because we're following the protocol rules and the rules of rounding as set forth by your blueprint. Now, the second part of this, I doubt you're going to see on your test, but I included it there just for extra practice because you're basically doing the same thing. But then I ask you to do a couple different things that might trick you a little bit, and it's there to make you think. But let's say you just want to practice a different type of heparin protocol problem or question. The only thing you have to do is choose a different weight. So you can use your weight, a significant other's weight, parent's weight. I would say keep it in the adult weight range. Um, don't, you don't want to do like a pediatric weight because I think that will just add an extra thing because I don't know that you would give a pediatric patient a heparin protocol unless they have clotting issues for some reason. But um, use an adult weight and you choose the weight. And then just whatever your calculation is, multiply for the bolus dose, multiply by 80, divide by 1,000, and whatever that answer is. And if you email me, hey, Dr. Rad, I did this for a 156 pound or 112 pound or 130 pound individual, um, and I got this. Is this correct? I can let you know if you got it right or not based off of those things. And I also have some additional practice on here if you haven't seen already, and I'll show you those in just a second. Um, and all I do is change the patient's weight because that's all that's really going to change in this question on your test is you're going to have a different weight. Might be 180 pounds, might be 220 pounds. It's going to be a different weight. And then you just do the same calculations. And then repetition is key to this, which is why we're going to go through and do a couple more of these just to make sure you got it down. In the event that they asked you what's next here, this is just asking you to go into the protocol a little bit further down. So it tells you after 6 hours, the patient has an APTT of 43 seconds. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go here and it shows me these APTT times. And I'm just going to look for the range that includes 43 seconds. And that happens to be number 12 in the protocol. So then I just follow what it tells me to do. Here it tells me to rebolus with 40 units per kilogram, and then it tells me to increase the rate by 2 units per kilogram per hour. So if I'm doing that question, I'm just gonna what I'm we're just gonna take for the bolus, I'm gonna follow the same steps. 70.9 kilograms, but instead of multiplying by 80 units, now I'm going to multiply by 40 units. I'm still going to use my same bolus dose strength, which is the 1,000 units per milliliter. And then I'm going to get a number that should be half of 5.7. But I'm going to take the 70.9 times 40 divided by 1,000. I get 2.836, and I'm just going to round that to 2.8 milliliters. So that's the rounded answer. So it should be half or about half of what the original was. You'll notice that I didn't put an equal sign here, so I just kept multiplying across. So it just to simplify that, you could always chop it up like I did if you want to. Now, for the new infusion rate, this is where like I said, I don't think you're gonna have this question. I don't even know that it's on the test options for you guys, but just in case, it's good to know what that is. So if my original infusion rate was 18 units per kilogram per hour, and it tells me to increase by 2 units per kilogram per hour, I'm going to add those, I'm going to add 2 to 18, and I'm going to get 20 units per kilogram per hour. Sometimes when I do that, students ask where that came from, and that's why was my original, right? And then I'm increasing it by 2. And so that's where the 20 is coming from. Okay. If it told you to decrease by 2, you know, then you'd go back to 18. So back and it would be down to 16, wherever you are. So it's always going to be based off of where you are or where it's currently set. And that's what the heparin protocol is all about, is just making adjustments. So every 6 hours, you're reassessing the patient. So that way you don't cause them to bleed out or to make sure they're not prematurely clotting. Okay. So again, I don't want the units per hour. I'm going to get rid of units, and I'm going to use what I have. They're on the same uh, insulin, or I'm sorry, they're on the same heparin IV, so that doesn't change. So we just take the 250 ml, 25,000 units, and then let's see what we get here. 70.9 times 20 times 250 divided by 25,000. I'm going to get 14.18, and I'm just going to round that to the nearest tenth. So 14.2 ml per hour. When I first solved this type of question, I took that 12.8 milliliters per hour. I added 2 to that, and I got 14.8 milliliters per hour. And you might say, like, well, that's pretty close here. But um, I would say don't do that because I think it only happens to be pretty close in this particular example. But if you try and do it in another situation or with another weight, it might not work out that way. And like I said, especially for these questions, your instructors are going to be looking at the decimal because they know that it should be like that 0.2 or that 0.8 or at least in that range. So make sure you add the 2 to the units, not to the milliliters. I'm just told you that just so you know what type of mistakes can happen. So there's another question here, and I'm gonna give you guys a little bit of time. Um, all the factors are the same. I just condensed everything. But go ahead and solve for the 165-pound patients. Make sure you can calculate the bolus dose and the infusion rate. And if you've already done this, just work through it again just to make sure you're not making any mistakes. And then while you're working through that, I'll highlight these so you can see them. And again, if you don't know, just type in I don't know and I'll work through them. But I want to at least challenge you to calculate that. And you can do the bolus first and then let me know what you get. And then, or you can give me both answers, but I'll shut up and let you work. All right, so some of the answers are starting to come in, and everyone looks to be coming in pretty good here. So, yes, if you got 6 mil and 13.5 mil per hour, then you got the same thing I got. Don't forget, uh, um, not 6 mil per hour. So the bolus is just in milliliters, right? And then the 13.5 is the milliliters per hour. Um, this one worked out that the 165 pounds is the same thing as I think it's 75 kilograms exactly. So that's what I was saying. Like sometimes you don't have to worry about the rounding, which is nice, except for at the very end, just in case you do. But there was really no rounding that you needed to do. Everything kind of evened out. Um, just so you know, like the shortcut that I follow is whatever the kilogram is times 80 and then divide by 1,000. That will give you the bolus in milliliters for these. I'm just giving you the shorthand. Whatever the kilogram is times 18 divided by 100 will give you the flow rate, or they give you the ml per hour for these. That's the shorthand. So if you're like ever wanting to like double check, or if, like sometimes I'll go through these like real quick, and that's just because I've memorized like this down to this point here, where I just take the patient's weight times 80 divided by 1,000 times 18 divided by 100, and then I can get the answers real quick. And guess what? Now you know that trick, and you're welcome to use that. But I would say double check your answers just to make sure everything's everything's good. All right, so those are the heparin questions. I know they're a little bit daunting. Um, Before we kind of close out for tonight, any questions, any particular question numbers, anything you want to see again, let me know. You can type in the chat or on mute, whatever's convenient for you. I do. Yeah. So there are 25 questions on the exam. So every dosage calc test you take um, is 25 questions. You can miss two. If you miss more than two, then you have to remediate, and then take a retest, um, and then like I said, you can only miss two. Um, and then the other thing I'll say is like the heparin question, like I mentioned before, even though there's two questions there, a bolus and a heparin, it counts as one question. So if you miss it, or if you miss both questions, you've only missed one question, but you're going to practice this so much that you won't miss it. Um, yeah, yeah, Lauren, you're 100% accurate there. Yeah, so like if the only thing that changes for these is the patient's weight, if we're following the standard weight-based heparin protocol. Can your instructors change like the bolus, like and the heparin, like the available? Yes, that can be changed, but I haven't seen it changed. Oh, yeah. So for 220 and 230, it's the same test. There's no difference. You both are, regardless of whether you're 220 or 230, you're taking the same test. The test is actually, the title of the test is just 220, 230. So, um, there's no difference in the test. And you only take, so those of you doing 220, when you go into 230, you don't take a separate test. You do take a pediatric dosage calc test, but that's just part of your class. That's not the dosage calc test like that you have to pass every semester. So the way it goes is you have four tests: 110, 130, the 220, 230, and then the 240. So 220, 230 is the same. And some of you might be going like, why is he telling us this? I had a student last semester that was getting ready to start either 220 or 230, whichever one they were going into. And they're like, can you help me prepare for my dosage calc test? And I was like, what do you mean? they're like, I gotta take that test again. And I was like, do you mean the pediatric? And she's like, no. And I said, well, the only thing you're gonna have to take is a pediatric dosage calc. And so that's all you have to worry about. Good questions, by the way. Okay. So I'll be connecting again with you guys for 2:20, 2:30 tomorrow afternoon. I can't remember the time off the top of my head. Actually, let me pull it up real quick.
It's at
Um,
3.
Yeah, 3 o'clock. Thank you very much. Um, and so if um a lot of times people ask me will it be the same. I will probably go through the same essential questions. But if you have a different question or you want to add to it, or if you have a question that I didn't get to answer to today, you can email me, you can ask me before we get started. Um, and but it'll most likely be a similar or I'll most likely go through the same types of questions because I never know who's going to be on the different days of the review. So I just assume that everyone's new or at least just wants to hear it again. So you don't have to come to the second review. I just wanted to offer that just in case this time or the next time was better for some people or not. And as always, I'll record it. So if you do have a question, if you can't make it, just email me and I will go over it during the review. Um, yeah. So I will post the videos. You should have the link to my YouTube channel and I will upload it to YouTube tonight. And then for tomorrow, I'll upload it once I'm done with all my review sessions tomorrow. So I'll upload it to my YouTube channel. So you should have a link to that. If you don't have the link, if you just do a YouTube search for Dr. Rad, um, or I think I go by Dr. Rad, the Rad Tutor, you should find me there, or you can email me and I'll make sure I send you the link so you can find them there. Yeah. Yep, you're welcome. Okay. Like I said, if you have any other questions, please feel free to email me. And if I don't hear from you, good luck on your test. I have all the confidence in the world that you guys will crush it. But if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. And thank you, Lauren, you too. And the rest of you take care. You're welcome. You're welcome. You're welcome. You're welcome. And good luck.